Welcome back to the Daily Share here at HLN, where we are in full justice mode. Of course, we're covering the Aaron Hernandez murder trial. We want to get you back into the courtroom because a valet is on that witness stand, and guess what he says? That he saw Aaron Hernandez with a gun. That was a couple of days prior to the killing of Odin Lloyd. Let's listen in.
That, you know, you had seen the handle of a gun and how it was positioned, didn't you?
I testified to what I saw on the date in question.
But you had just seen that demonstrated for you by Mr. McCauley and Trooper Benson immediately prior to your testimony, hadn't you, sir?
Yes, they did show me that, yes.
Had anyone ever demonstrated what a gun looked like to you before on that subject?
No.
And when they did that, that wasn't at 1:30 in the morning, was it?
No, it wasn't.
And it wasn't on a busy street in Boston just before the clubs let out, was it?
No, it was not.
And it wasn't dark?
No.
And you weren't standing over 18 feet away when you were observing this, were you?
No.
And you weren't looking through the glass of a vehicle when you observed it, were you?
No.
Now, you mentioned that you reported your observation that you made in those approximately 3 seconds to Jeffrey Keene, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And Mr. Keene, you know Mr. Keene, don't you?
Yes, I do.
You and Mr. Keene have worked together for many years.
Yes.
In fact, Mr. Keene recommended your position at the W Hotel, didn't he?
Yes.
And you told Mr. Keene about your observation, and Mr. Keene, the director of security, looked into the matter, didn't he? He followed up on your report, didn't he?
Right.
And you were with him when he did that.
What do you say did that?
You were with him when he followed up on what you told him. You described, you went over and looked and saw Mr. Hernandez. Is that right?
I identified Mr. Hernandez to him.
Yes. And then Mr. Keene assumed his duties as director of security, didn't he?
Okay.
And it's fair to say that after you informed Mr. Keene and after Mr. Keene made his observations, nothing was done. Isn't that?
You may answer with respect to you.
Can you repeat the question, please?
After you made your observations, reported them to Mr. Keene, accompanied him to the street corner, and Mr. Keene made his observations, nothing was done. Isn't that right?
No, nothing was done.
And you believe, do you not, sir, that Mr. Keene probably doubted you, don't you?
Objection sustained.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Joining me now, Tanya Miller. Tanya, prosecutor extraordinaire, you're back. You know, he had to go after this witness. Why? Because this is the valet, Tanya, and they see a gun. So what does he want to do? He wants to discredit him.
Absolutely.
Was he effective in doing it? What'd you see?
I think he was effective in at least casting some doubt on what he said, or at least the process by which he interacted with other people, perhaps insinuating that someone may have put some of this idea into his head, but pointing out, look, the distance, the time of night, what he was doing, that he was distracted, that maybe he wasn't as focused as he would like the jury to believe. That's all effective and fair game in cross-examining a witness like this.
Absolutely. But, Tanya, I have to ask you this, and the concern that I have is that, listen, if I'm a defense attorney, which I am, and you're thinking you're representing this case, this is a couple of days before, June 15th. So why is it relevant, and why does a judge even let a jury entertain perhaps the sighting of a gun 2 days prior? Why is it relevant? I know what you're going to say, but say it from a prosecutor's perspective.
Well, from a prosecutor's perspective, obviously they want to show that there was a course of conduct. They want the jury to believe that Aaron Hernandez, and it's not right, but they want the jury to believe that Aaron Hernandez is this gun-toting thug. And so any evidence in that regard that they can get in front of that jury, the reason why they probably were able to get this in is because it was so close in time to the homicide. homicide. So we've got some proximity in terms of time, perhaps some proximity in terms of the description of the gun the couple days before as being similar to the gun that they allege was used in this case. So they want to point to all the similarities, but ultimately, Joey, you're exactly right. A defense attorney is going to want to fight this tooth and nail. You are not going to want jurors to see your client carrying a gun 2 days before murder.
Absolutely not. I'm going to say it's irrelevant, Judge. It doesn't go to the issues at the time. So what if he had a gun 2 days prior?
Absolutely.
But, you know, you mentioned something, and I completely agree with what you said when we talked about this earlier, which was death by 1,000 cuts. Whenever you have a case like this, which is circumstantial, Tanya, the prosecution builds, and it builds. And so just evaluating it to this point, we know they don't have a murder weapon. That's the prosecution, right? They don't have a confession, the prosecution. But to this point, based upon the surveillance video, it's a gun in his hand, or maybe not a gun, the text messages, what's your evaluation and assessment to the strength of the prosecution's case to this point?
Gosh, you know what? It's so tough to really say, because you often need that closing argument. You need the prosecutor to put it together for you, to connect those dots for you. I'd say they might have some trouble here with maybe 1 or 2 jurors. They've got to bring it home in closing, for sure.
And that's the whole point, Tanya. Closing argument, we remind the viewers, you take all that evidence at the trial and you tell the jury, you ask the jury to interpret it in the way that you want them to interpret it. Of course, if I'm the defense, I want you to interpret it my way.
Absolutely.
Prosecution does the same. Tanya Miller's not going anywhere. You at home, please don't go anywhere, because up next, you know what? We'll listen to Aaron Hernandez's babysitter's riveting testimony again. And we're talking about Hernandez making advances on her and a car ride where she met Odin Lloyd, the man prosecutors say Hernandez killed. Don't go anywhere.